We have a really substantial task ahead of us today. We are looking at a figure who is so often reduced to a caricature. You know, the lips, the strut, the sheer excess of the rock and roll lifestyle. Our mission is to dismantle that public image and find the highly educated strategist underneath. We are conducting a comprehensive analysis of the life, the business acumen, and the cultural impact of Sir Michael Philip Jagger.
Right, and it is a subject that demands a strictly factual, analytical approach. As we record this conversation in early 2026, Jagger is 82 years old. To put that specific longevity into perspective, he was born while the Second World War was still being fought in Europe. His career has spanned more than 6 decades at this point. There are very few figures in cultural history who have remained at the absolute apex of their industry for that length of time.
Usually when people discuss this topic, the conversation immediately drifts toward gossip columns or that pervasive rock star mythology.
That is exactly what we are going to avoid today. The goal for you, the listener, is to understand the mechanics of his longevity. We have compiled a massive stack of source materials. We are looking at extensive biographical records, complete discographies, and detailed historical accounts ranging from 1960 right up to the present day. We need to actively contrast the public image.
Which is the rebellious counterculture icon.
Exactly. We must contrast that with the private reality, which is that of a middle-class, highly educated strategist. The male voice in the archival materials often highlights the business side, and that is where we will focus a lot of our attention today.
Let's start at the very beginning. The origin story is often where the mythology completely overtakes the reality. There is this pervasive idea of the working-class hero in British rock music, but that does not really apply to this subject, does it?
Not in the slightest, and that is a crucial distinction to make right out of the gate if we want to understand his later financial decisions. Michael Philip Jagger was born on July 26, 1943 in Dartford, Kent. This was not a story of poverty or scraping by in the post-war ruins of Britain. He was born into a very solid, supportive, middle-class family. His father, Basil Jagger, known as Joe, was a physical education teacher.
And he wasn't just a standard gym teacher, from what the historical records show.
No, Joe Jagger was actually a highly significant figure in the field of physical education. He helped popularize basketball in Britain and even wrote books on the subject. This detail is incredibly important because it introduced the core concept of physical discipline and athletic training into his son's life from a very young age. Then you have his mother, Eva. She was a hairdresser and she was very politically active in the Conservative Party.
That political affiliation seems quite significant, given the anti-establishment role Jagger eventually played.
It provides a background of strict conventionality. The middle-class distinction matters because it suggests a safety net. It points to an emphasis on education that many of his musical peers simply did not have. This background clearly contributed to his later financial astuteness. He was not scrambling for basic survival, he was navigating a deliberate path.
He was also academically successful, which completely contradicts the rebellious dropout narrative.
Very much so. He passed the 11+ exam, which was the rigid gateway to higher education in the UK at the time, and he attended Dartford Grammar School. But the most critical divergence from the standard rock and roll myth is his time at the London School of Economics, the LSE. He didn't just drift casually into music, he was actively studying finance and accounting on a government grant.
What were his actual career plans at that specific stage?
He had serious traditional career alternatives in mind. He seriously considered becoming a journalist or even a politician. He is actually on record comparing the role of a politician to that of a pop star. He viewed them both as public-facing roles that require a very specific type of calculated performance.
That accounting training at the LSE must have been highly useful later on when dealing with the industry.
It was absolutely foundational. When we look at how his band eventually managed their own complex affairs and broke away from the predatory management practices of the 1960s, you can trace that financial independence directly back to that training at the LSE. He understood numbers. He understood what the clauses in a contract actually meant. That is exceedingly rare for a 20-year-old artist in any era.
Let's move the timeline to the meeting that changed everything. It involves a specific railway station.
It is a meticulously documented event, almost cinematic in its precise details. He had originally met Keith Richards at Wentworth Primary School back in 1950, but they had completely lost touch when they went to different secondary schools. The pivotal reunion happened on October 17, 1961, at Dartford Railway Station, Platform 2 to be exact.
And it wasn't just the act of seeing each other, it was specifically what he was carrying under his arm.
Exactly. He was holding vinyl records by Chuck Berry and Muddy Waters. In 1961 England, these were not items you could just casually find in a local high street shop. They were imported directly from Chess Records in Chicago. They were rare, expensive commodities. It immediately signaled to Richards that he was not just a casual pop listener, but a dedicated obsessive. It revealed a shared, intense obsession with American rhythm and blues. That chance meeting led to the formation of a crude, early group they called the Blues Boys, and eventually their move to a shared, freezing flat in Edith Grove in Chelsea.
This transitions us directly into the early 1960s and the formation of the band properly.
The timeline accelerates dramatically here. They began frequenting the Ealing Club, watching Alexis Korner's Blues Incorporated perform. It was in that environment that the nucleus of the band formed. They played their first official gig as the Rolling Stones spelled without the G initially, named directly after a Muddy Waters song at the Marquee Club on July 12, 1962. The lineup eventually consolidated around Jagger, Richards, Brian Jones, Bill Wyman, and Charlie Watts.
The strategy initially wasn't about writing original hit songs, though.
No, the initial strategy was absolute purism. They were exclusively playing covers of American R&B, artists like Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley. They viewed themselves as serious blues evangelists. The necessary shift to original songwriting was a calculated business decision strictly enforced by their manager at the time, Andrew Lugg Oldham.
Oldham seems to be a pivotal, driving figure in shaping the band's commercial direction.
He was instrumental. There is a well-documented event where Oldham essentially locked his two lead figures in a kitchen and flatly refused to let them out until they had written an original song. He knew that to survive financially in the music industry, you had to own the publishing copyright, not just perform other people's intellectual property. They emerged from that kitchen with a song called As Tears Go By, which was actually given to and recorded by Marianne Faithfull first.
But the real turning point, the singular moment they became a global phenomenon, was the release of Satisfaction.
Yes. Can't get no satisfaction. In 1965, changed them overnight from a working blues cover band into the definitive voice of a generation. But we have to look closely at the image management here. This is exactly where the anti-Beatles concept comes into play. The Beatles were heavily marketed as the lovable mop tops in matching tailored suits. To compete in the same market, the Stones needed a completely different lane. They were deliberately marketed as defiant, unkempt troublemakers.
Was that rebellious nature his actual personality, or was it purely marketing?
He has been quite analytical about this in retrospect. In a 1992 interview with Vanity Fair, he admitted that he wasn't actively trying to be rebellious at all. He viewed himself as fundamentally ordinary and suburban. He pointed out that the songs they were singing were quite tame by American blues standards, but the specific context of the time, the long hair, the attitude, the aggressive sound, made him seem incredibly dangerous to the older, post-war generation. He stepped into a predefined role that was largely created for him by the cultural friction of that specific era.
That cultural friction eventually led to very real legal consequences. We need to examine the drug busts of 1967.
This was a direct collision between the conservative establishment and the emerging youth culture. The News of the World newspaper ran a sensationalized feature called Pop Stars and Drugs. They deliberately set up a sting operation. Interestingly, it was a clear case of mistaken identity initially. The undercover reporter overheard Brian Jones discussing drugs in a club but falsely attributed the quotes to Jagger. This directly led to the famous Redlands bust. Police raided Keith Richards' country home, Redlands. Both men were arrested. The charge against Jagger was for the possession of 4 over-the-counter pet pills that he had purchased completely legally in Italy.
The resulting sentence seems incredibly harsh by any modern legal standard.
It was explicitly intended to be a public example. He was sentenced to 3 months in a standard prison. However, this heavy-handed approach backfired on the establishment. The editor of the Times, William Rees-Mogg, who was a staunch traditional conservative, wrote a highly famous editorial titled, "Who Breaks a Butterfly on a Wheel?"
That particular phrase has become legendary in legal and cultural history. What did it actually signify in this context?
Rees-Mogg was strongly criticizing the absolute severity of the sentence, arguing it was purely because the defendant was a highly visible public figure. He was arguing for the fundamental principle of equal justice, stating that you cannot punish a man more severely simply because he is famous or disliked by the establishment. Following that editorial and the subsequent appeal, he was released on a conditional discharge. But the event permanently cemented the outlaw reputation. It made the carefully constructed marketing seem entirely real.
The end of the 1960s seems to be defined strictly by tragedy for the organization.
1969 was a massive, dark pivot point. First, you have the rapid deterioration of Brian Jones. His substance abuse had become entirely debilitating, and crucially, from a business perspective, he could not get a visa to enter the United States. This was directly hindering the band's ability to generate touring revenue. It was a cold business decision. The core members had to visit his home to officially terminate his employment with the band. Less than a month later, on July 3rd, 1969, Jones drowned in his swimming pool.
He later admitted he felt he had behaved childishly regarding Jones during that period.
He did state that on the record. He noted that they were very young and fundamentally did not understand the clinical nature of addiction. They picked on Jones, who was admittedly manipulative but also highly vulnerable. Just 2 days after Jones's death, the band played a massive scheduled concert in Hyde Park. It was originally planned as an introduction for their new guitarist, Mick Taylor, but it immediately turned into a highly publicized tribute. He read Percy Bysshe Shelley's poem Adonis to the crowd and released thousands of white butterflies. It was a moment of intense high theatricality, and it officially marked the permanent transition of leadership solely to the remaining 2 core songwriters.
And then that same year ends with the events at Altamont.
December 6, 1969, the Altamont Free Concert in California. If Hyde Park was the eulogy for Brian Jones, Altamont was the grim eulogy for the entire 1960s hippie idealism. The fatal error was the security arrangement. The security was provided by the Hells Angels motorcycle gang.
Why did they make that specific logistical decision?
It was a profoundly naive decision based on the prevailing idea that the counterculture could effectively police itself outside of traditional law enforcement. The Hells Angels were reportedly compensated with beer. The atmosphere was highly violent and chaotic from the very start of the day. A young man named Meredith Hunter, who drew a firearm, was stabbed to death near the stage by a member of the Hells Angels while the band was actively playing their set. The frontman was profoundly terrified. He was quoted in source materials using very strong language to describe how scared he was. It proved definitively that the peace and love ethos had a very dark, unregulated underbelly. It changed his entire approach. He retreated from that open, accessible vulnerability and became much more guarded and corporately structured.
Moving into the 1970s, the narrative shifts sharply from cultural warfare to sheer financial survival.
The 1970s began with an existential financial crisis. The UK Labour government at the time had imposed a 93% super tax on the highest tier of earners.
Can we break down what that actually means for an earner's bottom line?
It means that for every single pound they earned in revenue, the government legally took 93 pence. They were left with exactly 7 pence. From that remaining 7 pence, they had to pay their entire backing band, their road crew, their management commissions, and their own basic living expenses. It was mathematically impossible to continue operating as a business entity within the United Kingdom. They were facing total bankruptcy due to massive tax bills and extremely poor financial management by their previous handlers, specifically Alan Klein. They had no choice but to leave England entirely. This is historically known as the tax exile. In 1971, the entire corporate entity of the band moved to the south of France.
This specific period is where the highly acclaimed album Exile on Main Saint originates.
Correct. The recording sessions took place in the basement of Villa Nelcote, which was the large home his songwriting partner was renting. It was a completely chaotic, unregulated environment. The extreme humidity in the basement meant the instruments were constantly going out of tune. The local electricity supply was totally unreliable. The engineers sometimes had to literally splice cables into the nearby French railway lines just to steal enough power to run the amplifiers. But from a strict musical standpoint, it is a fascinating period because he actually learned to play the guitar proficiently during this time. He contributed significantly to the underlying musical composition of the tracks, not just the vocal melodies and lyrics, but more importantly, from our analytical perspective, this is exactly when he took absolute control of the business apparatus.
He brought in a key figure named Prince Rupert Lowenstein around this time.
He did. Prince Rupert Lowenstein was a highly connected merchant banker and financial advisor. He was hired specifically to completely restructure the organization. Lowenstein advised them to become non-residents of the UK for tax purposes. He essentially turned them from a working music group into a highly optimized global brand and a multinational corporation. This is the exact moment where the LSE student overtook the rock star. They aggressively separated the touring revenue, the recording royalties, and the merchandising rights into completely different holding companies. These were often strategically based in the Netherlands to maximize tax efficiency. They became an incredibly lean, profitable machine.
Visually and aesthetically, his persona changed significantly in the 1970s as well.
The visual aesthetics of the 1972 American tour really defined the entire era. We saw the heavy use of glitter, stage makeup, and elaborate jumpsuits. He also developed a completely new vocal technique. It was a guttural belt and a specific roar that was acoustically designed to fill massive sports arenas, not just small clubs or theaters. He was physically adapting to the sheer scale of their commercial success. And musically, he was driving the organization into entirely new demographic territories. The album Some Girls in 1978 is the prime example of this. The record is heavily influenced by the prevailing trends of disco and punk rock. That direction was almost entirely his influence. He was frequently attending Studio 54 in New York City. He was actively listening to what was currently generating revenue in the clubs and adapting it.
He also harbored serious ambitions outside of the music industry, specifically in film and acting.
He did, though, with decidedly mixed commercial and critical results. He starred in a film called Performance, which was filmed in 1968 but delayed and released in 1970. He played a reclusive, eccentric rock star named Turner. It was a role that critics noted was not too far from his actual reality. He also played the titular Australian outlaw in the film Ned Kelly in 1970.
The archival materials also point to some highly significant missed opportunities in his acting career.
Yes, there are several fascinating what-ifs. He officially auditioned for the lead role of Dr. Frank Enfurter in the film adaptation of the Rocky Horror Show, but he lost the part to Tim Curry. He was even officially cast in Werner Herzog's highly ambitious film Fitzcarraldo. However, he had to completely drop out of the production due to severe scheduling conflicts with a massive upcoming tour. This necessitated all of his completed scenes being entirely reshot with a different actor. There was even a serious preliminary plan for him to play the character Feyd-Rautha in Alejandro Jodorowsky's massive adaptation of the novel Dune, though that entire project notoriously never materialized.
As we look at the timeline entering the 1980s, the core partnership that had driven the band's success began to severely fracture.
It was a highly publicized period of internal conflict that his partner later referred to in the press as World War III. The root cause was a fundamental power struggle over the direction of the corporation. His partner had been dealing with severe substance addiction for much of the 1970s. Because of that absence, he had been forced to manage the entire band's operations almost single-handedly. When his partner finally got clean in the late 70s and early 80s, he naturally wanted to reassert his traditional role in the decision-making process. However, he had been successfully running the entire show for a decade and was decidedly not keen on relinquishing that operational control. Furthermore, he signed a highly lucrative solo recording contract, releasing his debut solo album She's the Boss in 1985. His partner viewed this solo venture as a massive betrayal of the corporate unity.
The tension reached a point where they completely ceased touring operations.
Correct. He flatly refused to tour in support of their 1986 studio album Dirty Work. His stated reason was that he wanted to focus entirely on his new solo career. The animosity between the two was highly public and toxic. His partner was openly disparaging him in the international press, referring to him using mocking nicknames like Brenda or Her Majesty, specifically targeting his perceived arrogance and corporate detachment.
Yet right in the middle of this intense corporate dispute, they both managed to participate in the massive Live Aid event in 1985.
They did, but notably, he performed entirely as a solo artist. He executed a highly choreographed theatrical duet with Tina Turner that made major global headlines, and he also recorded a separate video duet with David Bowie for the song Dancing in the Street. That specific single went straight to #1 in the UK charts. The main band did not perform together as a unit at Live Aid. It very starkly highlighted the professional separation.
How did they eventually resolve this massive operational deadlock?
Pure economics and market reality played the largest part in the reconciliation. Both men quickly realized that their respective solo careers, his album Primitive Cool and his partner's album Talk is Cheap while moderately successful, were absolutely nothing compared to the sheer commercial generating power of the main brand. They arranged a formal summit meeting in Barbados in 1988. They systematically hashed out their operational differences. They essentially realized they were contractually and financially stuck with each other if they wanted to maintain their elite global stature. This crucial meeting directly led to the writing of the Steel Wheels album and the massive subsequent global tour in 1989 and 1990.
And archival sources indicate that specific tour essentially set the modern template for the entire concert industry.
It completely launched the modern era of the massive industrial touring machine. Before the Steel Wheels tour, stadium rock tours were very often chaotic logistical nightmares with terrible acoustic sound and massive financial waste. Under his strict corporate direction, they thoroughly professionalized the entire concept. They introduced enormous, custom-built stages, integrated massive corporate sponsorships, and utilized military-level logistical precision to move the massive operation from city to city. It was the exact historical moment they officially transitioned into a massive touring corporation that just happened to play music.
Moving into the 1990s and the 2000s, he seems to comfortably settle into the role of a respected establishment figure.
He did continue to record solo. He released Wandering Spirit in 1993, which was produced by Rick Rubin, and is widely considered by critics to be his strongest solo effort. But the primary operational focus remained the main band. The album Voodoo Lounge in 1994 was a massive success. It was their first record without their original bassist Bill Wyman, but it still won a Grammy Award for Best Rock Album. Throughout this era, they consistently ranked as the highest-grossing touring act in the world. And then came the ultimate establishment accolade. He received a knighthood in 2002.
Which, predictably, caused another round of public friction within the organization.
It did. His partner criticized the acceptance of the honor highly publicly. He stated that it completely contradicted their foundational anti-establishment roots. The argument was that the band that was once prosecuted by the state was now accepting elite honors from the palace. His response to this criticism was quite revealing. He accepted the honor gracefully, noting specifically that his father, the traditional school teacher, was immensely proud of the achievement. It clearly demonstrated that despite decades of the rock star lifestyle, the fundamental approval of his middle-class father still mattered deeply to him.
He also aggressively diversified his business portfolio into film production during this period.
He founded a production company called Jagged Films in 1991. It is important to note this wasn't merely a vanity project to attach his name to. They produced serious, critically evaluated work. They produced the film Enigma in 2001, which was a drama about wartime codebreakers. They produced The Women in 2008. He served as a primary producer on the James Brown biographical film Get On Up in 2014, and he was highly involved in the HBO television series Vinyl in 2016. He also produced a documentary titled Being Mick in 2001, which provided a highly controlled but rare glimpse into his daily operational life and business meetings.
Transitioning into the most recent era, the 2010s and 2020s, his physical energy appears undiminished, but the records show there have been significant health events.
In 2019, there was a highly publicized medical incident. A routine checkup revealed a serious issue with his heart valve. He required a specialized medical procedure known as a transcatheter aortic valve replacement, or TVR.
What exactly does that specific medical procedure entail for the patient?
It is a highly advanced, minimally invasive surgical procedure. A new functioning valve is inserted into the heart without actually removing the old, damaged valve. Instead of performing traditional open heart surgery and opening the chest cavity, the surgical team threads a catheter directly through the femoral artery in the patient's leg, guiding it all the way up to the heart chambers. They then expand a small balloon to securely place the new valve. For an average patient in their mid-70s, this is a major physiological event requiring months of significant recovery. In an incredible display of physical resilience, he was back on a concert stage, performing within 6 weeks. He even posted videos of himself performing complex dance routines in a studio to publicly prove his fitness to the insurance underwriters and the fans.
He also continued to experiment musically outside of the main brand, such as with the Super Heavy project.
That occurred in 2011. It was a diverse supergroup featuring Joss Stone, Damian Marley, Dave Stewart, and the composer A.R. Rahman. It was a clear demonstration that he still possessed a strong desire to explore musical genres entirely outside of traditional rock, incorporating elements of reggae and Indian fusion. He has consistently remained analytically curious about new musical structures.
But the most significant operational blow to the band occurred in 2021.
The loss of their drummer, Charlie Watts. The timeline shows Watts withdrew from the scheduled tour for an unspecified medical procedure, and he subsequently died in August 2021. Watts was universally considered the fundamental rhythmic and personal heartbeat of the entire organization. The corporate decision to continue the massive tour without him was viewed as highly controversial by some critics. However, he stated very clearly and publicly that they carried on simply because, quote, that's what Charlie wanted. They systematically paid tribute to him on stage during every single performance of that tour.
And incredibly, they are still actively creating and releasing new material.
Yes, the Hackney Diamonds era, which featured brand new original material released in late 2023. They also demonstrated their ongoing market relevance by scoring a #1 hit single in Germany with the track Living in a Ghost Town in 2020, right during the height of the global pandemic. As of 2025, financial analysts estimate his personal net worth to be approximately £440 million.
Hmm.
Furthermore, he and his primary songwriting partner were officially honored with bronze statues in their hometown of Dartford in 2023. They have literally become historical monuments within their own lifetimes.
We must objectively address his personal life. As the data shows, it is a massive component of the ongoing public narrative.
It is a highly complex personal history. The records show he has fathered 8 children with 5 different women. His first highly publicized long-term relationship was with Marianne Faithfull, lasting from 1966 to 1970. They famously co-wrote the track Sister Morphine. That relationship ended following her highly documented struggles with addiction, a tragic miscarriage, and a suicide attempt. Following that, he was involved with Bianca Pérez Mora Macias. They were legally married in a massive media event in Saint-Tropez in 1971. They were heavily documented as the ultimate jet-set couple of the decade, but she ultimately filed for divorce in 1978, citing grounds of adultery.
That was followed by his longest continuous relationship with Jerry Hall.
That relationship spanned from 1977 to 1999. They participated in a traditional Hindu wedding ceremony in Bali in 1990. However, when the relationship eventually dissolved, the legal proceedings revealed a massive technicality. The High Court formally declared that specific Bali ceremony to be legally invalid under British law. This resulted in an annulment rather than a traditional divorce. From a purely financial perspective, that legal technicality saved him an incredibly significant amount of money in the final asset settlement. Following that era, he was in a long-term relationship with Elren Scott, a highly successful fashion designer, from 2001 until her tragic death by suicide in 2014. Her will left her entire estate, valued at approximately $9 million, entirely to him. In response, he established a permanent educational scholarship in her name at the Central St. Martin's Arts College. Since 2014, he's been in a relationship with Melanie Hamrick, a professional ballet dancer who is the mother of his youngest child, Devereaux, born in 2016.
The chronological age range of his children is quite staggering when you review the actual birth dates.
It is a vast span. His oldest child, Karis, was born in 1970. His youngest child, Devereaux, was born in 2016. That represents a 46-year chronological gap between siblings. To put that in perspective, he officially became a great-grandfather in 2014, which was actually 2 full years before his youngest son was even born.
Finally, let's deeply analyze the icon himself based on the data. How exactly does he physically and operationally maintain this unprecedented level of performance?
It fundamentally comes down to extreme vocal and physical discipline. Over the decades, he systematically evolved his singing style from a raw, damaging blues shout to a highly technical, controlled style designed specifically to preserve the vocal cords over a 2-hour performance. But the daily fitness regime is the true key to the longevity. The data shows he regularly runs 12 kilometers a day. He actively engages in kickboxing, intensive yoga, and classical ballet training to maintain flexibility. During a single stadium performance, tracking metrics estimate he covers up to 12 miles on foot. This relentless physical discipline is the primary objective reason the band can still execute massive global tours in their 80s, while the vast majority of their historical peers have either burned out physically or passed away.
And his overall cultural impact clearly extends far beyond just the music sales.
Absolutely. He actively challenged rigid gender norms in the 1960s with his use of stage makeup and highly feminine, fluid physical movements. The artist David Bowie specifically cited him in interviews as a mother image rather than simply a traditional masculine sex symbol. He essentially designed and established the permanent archetype of the modern rock frontman. Every lead singer, from Steven Tyler to Iggy Pop, utilized the exact blueprint he created. His impact is so vast that there are even prehistoric fossils officially named after him in the scientific record, including Jagermerix naida, which was an ancient species of long-legged pig.
And what does the data say about his ultimate legacy in the business sector?
He completely shifted the fundamental economic paradigm of the music industry. He led the transition of recording artists from being mere disposable employees of massive record labels to becoming the absolute owners of their own master recordings and their complex touring logistics. He pioneered the highly lucrative concept of corporate tour sponsorships, beginning with the groundbreaking Jovan Musk deal in 1981, specifically to maximize gross revenue. He ruthlessly treated the band as a multinational corporation, which is precisely what ensured its survival across 6 decades.
So, tracing the timeline, we've gone from a chance meeting on a Dartford train platform to over 60 years of total global dominance.
And he achieved all of this remarkably without ever publishing a traditional memoir. The publishing records show he actually returned a massive £1 million cash advance in the 1980s because he reportedly found the process of writing a memoir incredibly boring, or claimed he simply couldn't remember the details clearly enough. By refusing to write it all down, he has effectively left the recorded music and the massive corporate business record as his one true autobiography.
It leaves you with a very provocative thought to consider. When you look at the sheer scale of the touring industry today, what exactly happens to the fundamental blueprint of the music business when the original architect who built the infrastructure is no longer here to iterate on it? Thanks for listening.
Thank you.